I wasn't supposed to be there that day. That's the thing nobody tells you about witnessing something that stops time. You almost didn't. You almost took the other route. You almost stayed for a second cup of tea. I'd come down from Edinburgh the Tuesday before, staying with my cousin in Pimlico. She works near the palace, has done for 11 years, and she's the kind of person who says things like, "Oh, it's just a building," while simultaneously knowing every gate guard's rotation schedule by heart. I borrowed her visitor badge for the morning. I had no particular agenda. I wanted to walk. London in early November does something to you. The sky sits low and gray, and the leaves on the mall have gone copper, and the whole city smells like wet wool and exhaust, and something older beneath that, something that doesn't have a name. I was near the side entrance, not the main forecourt. The tourists were thick there, the ones with their selfie sticks angled up at the gates like they were trying to photograph God. I drifted left, past a cluster of school children in yellow safety vests, past a woman selling roasted chestnuts from a cart that smelled like caramel and smoke. The guard was standing at his post. I noticed him the way you notice someone doing a job that requires extraordinary stillness. You notice the effort of the stillness, even when they make it look effortless. He was young. Not just young the way all guards look young from a distance. Actually young. I'd put him mid-20s, maybe less. Square jaw. Eyes forward. The bearskin hat made him look taller than he probably was. His boots caught what little light the morning had left to give. I'd been watching him for maybe 4 minutes. Not staring, just the idle observation of someone with nowhere particular to be when the car arrived. Not from the main entrance. From the side. The kind of arrival that isn't announced, that happens in the margins of official things. A dark vehicle, the sort with windows that swallow light instead of reflecting it. The crowd didn't surge. They weren't close enough. And, besides, the British public has a particular etiquette around these moments. A collective held breath, a sideways glance, the pretense of not looking while looking. I looked. The door opened. I caught the edge of a coat first. Deep burgundy. Then, a small hand on the car door frame. A child's hand, steadying itself. Then, Princess Charlotte stepped out. And she was so much smaller in person than photographs prepare you for, which sounds ridiculous but is somehow true of every person you've ever seen only in images. She was wearing a dark coat with a white collar. And she was looking at something on the ground near her feet with the absolute focused concentration that children apply to utterly private thoughts. Behind her, Queen Camilla emerged. This is where I need to be careful about what I actually saw and what I filled in after. What I saw. Camilla speaking to someone near the vehicle, a woman in a dark suit, earpiece visible. The conversation was brief, directional. One hand moved, a gesture I can only describe as the kind you make when you're clarifying something that should already have been handled. What reached me, carried on the cold air in a pause between the chestnut cart noise and a bus passing on the road behind me. Charlotte shouldn't be here for this part. That was it. 7 words. And the guard at the post, the young one, the still one, heard it too. I know because his eyes moved. Just fractionally. Just enough. 11 months of training, and the eyes still moved. The school children near me had stopped caring about the palace, and were now negotiating loudly over whose turn it was to hold the permission slip folder. The woman with the chestnut cart called something to a colleague. A pigeon landed on the gate pillar and regarded everything with bureaucratic indifference. Charlotte, meanwhile, had crouched down on the pavement. She'd found something. A leaf, or a stone, or one of those small urban mysteries that only children and very old people and poets bother to investigate. Her whole body was bent toward it, coat pooling on the wet stone. The aide in the dark suit was already moving toward her. And here's where the story turns. Because the guard, my guard, the still one, stepped. Not far. Not dramatically. One step, precisely lateral, the kind of movement that takes up almost no space but repositions everything. He placed himself, without any theater whatsoever, between the moving aide and the child. Not blocking, not confronting, just present, in a way that required the aide to adjust her angle, to slow, to reconsider. Charlotte looked up from her discovery. She looked at him. He was looking forward. Standard position, eyes front. But his jaw had shifted. Barely a millimeter. The kind of shift a face makes when it's choosing to do nothing, which is different from a face that has nothing to do. The aide stopped. Not because she'd been told to. Because something in the geometry of that moment made stopping feel like the right thing. Charlotte stood up. She was holding whatever she'd found. I couldn't see what it was from my distance, some small treasure. And she looked at it. And then she looked up at the guard again. He still wasn't looking at her. But the corner of his mouth, just the corner, did something. It wasn't a smile. Not exactly. It was the thing before a smile. The decision point. Charlotte noticed. I am not going to tell you what happened next as though I know it perfectly, because I don't. Witnesses never do. We construct narratives from fragments, from the angle we were standing at, from what we already believe. What I can tell you is what I saw. Charlotte walked forward. She didn't run. She didn't make a scene. She simply walked, with the particular gravity of a child who has decided something, to a position approximately 2 feet from the guard's right side, and stood there. Just stood. Like she was on post too. The aide had stopped moving. The burgundy coat of the queen moved behind the vehicle, attention pulled elsewhere. Some exchange with a palace official, documents, the machinery of official life doing what it does. 4:43 seconds. I counted. God help me. I counted. Princess Charlotte of Wales stood next to the royal guard and watched the street with him. 2 people doing nothing. In parallel, the woman next to me, a tourist I hadn't noticed arrive, said very quietly to her companion, "What is happening?" Her companion said, "I have no idea." They were both right. There are rules for everything in that world. Every palace insider will tell you this. Not with bitterness, usually, more with the tone of someone describing weather. The rules exist the way weather exists. You dress for them. You plan around them. You don't argue with them in public. The rule, as I later understood it, was procedural. Charlotte's presence at that particular side entrance coincided with a handover of some kind, some official function, some scheduled machinery. Camilla's instruction wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even preference. It was the management of a 10-year-old's afternoon, the way you'd redirect a child away from a dull adult dinner without making her feel redirected. That's the part the people who shared the video later didn't understand. Because by the time it circulated, the framing had already been decided. Headlines were doing what headlines do, finding the sharpest edge of a story and pressing until it drew blood. But I was there. I watched the shape of it from 12 meters away. And the shape of it was not a drama. Or, it was a drama, but a small, interior one. The kind that never makes the official record. The aide's name, I found out later, was something beginning with S. I'll call her S. She was efficient in the way palace staff always seem efficient. Not frantic, not performative, just quietly competent in a way that makes you feel slightly inadequate by proximity. She'd redirected course after the guard's lateral step had stalled her approach. She stood now about 4 meters back, tablet in hand, waiting. Waiting, I realized, for Charlotte to finish whatever she'd decided to do. S understood something that the headline writers didn't. You don't drag a royal child. You wait. Camilla had disappeared through a door I couldn't fully see. And Charlotte was still standing next to the guard. She'd put whatever she'd found into her coat pocket. There was the brief shape of small hands at the pocket edge, and then, the thing was gone, claimed, a trophy from the pavement. Now she was fully upright, arms at her sides, watching the street. The guard, I still didn't know his name, still don't. He's never been identified in any version of this story I've found since. Breathed once. Slowly. The kind of breath that comes from the diaphragm, not the chest. They train that, apparently. The stillness is not natural. It is practiced, and practiced until it becomes something that resembles nature. Charlotte breathed too. I watched this. 2 people breathing on a cold November pavement while the city went about its city business around them. And then she spoke. I couldn't hear it. I want to be honest about that. I am close enough to see, but not close enough to hear. Lip reading is not something I do. So what follows is inference and observation, not transcript. She turned her head toward him. She said something short. For words, maybe 5. A question. I could tell by the slight tilt of her chin at the end, that universal human punctuation mark. The guard did not respond. He is not supposed to. This is the rule, the weather, the thing you dress for. Tourists spend entire vacations trying to get a reaction. Comedians have made careers of it. The not responding is part of the job. It is not unkindness. It is the job. Charlotte waited. She seemed to be considering something. Then, she said something else. This one was shorter. 2 words, maybe 3. And the guard, my guard, did something I have turned over in my mind perhaps 50 times since November. He blinked. Deliberately. Slowly. Once. Not a flinch. Not a slip. A choice. Charlotte's face changed. It was the face of someone who has received an answer they weren't sure they'd get. Not jubilant. Not triumphant. Just satisfied. The quiet satisfaction of a child who has tested a hypothesis and found the result confirms her theory. She turned back to face the street. She stood there another 12 seconds. Then, she walked, without being fetched, without fuss, back toward S, who fell in a step beside her, and they moved together through a door and out of my line of sight. The guard returned to full stillness. The street carried on. A double-decker went past. A man in a blue puffer jacket took 3 photos of the gate and looked at them, unsatisfied, and took 3 more. The chestnut cart woman said something that made her colleague laugh, a short, bright laugh that disappeared as soon as it came. I stood there for longer than made sense. I was trying to locate the precise thing I had just witnessed, hold it still enough to examine it. The way you cup water in your hands, knowing you're losing it even while you try. What had Charlotte asked him? I've thought of 2 possibilities, and I keep returning to them both, unable to choose. The first, something child practical. Do you get cold? Or how long do you stand there? Or does your hat hurt? The kind of question children ask, because they are not yet fully conditioned to pretend the obvious is not curious. The second, something simpler. Are you all right? Because here is what I noticed, in those 43 seconds before she spoke. Charlotte had not been watching the street. She'd been watching him. The way children watch when they think they've noticed something the adults have missed. With that specific, serious attention that has not yet learned to pass itself off as casual. Whatever she saw, whatever registered in that child's sideways understanding of other people, she decided to stay. Not because she was defying anyone. Not because she was making a point. Because she had noticed something she wanted to sit with for a while. And the guard, who had stepped once, laterally, into a geometry that bought her 43 seconds of November pavement. He had let her. My cousin asked me about it over dinner. She'd heard it secondhand. Already, within 6 hours, something had traveled from pavement to person to phone and back again, picking up speed and barnacles as it went. By the time it reached her, it had become something larger than what I'd seen. A confrontation, a defiance, a guard who'd refused an order and protected the princess. I told her what I actually saw. She looked at me the way people look when the real version of something is less exciting than the version they already have in their heads, which is to say, a little disappointed and a little relieved simultaneously. He just blinked, she said. He just blinked. She poured more wine. She thought about it. That's actually more interesting, she said finally. She was right. But interesting doesn't travel well. Interesting requires patience, and patience is not what the internet optimizes for. What traveled instead was a version of events that had been sharpened into something usable. I watched it happen in real time over the next 3 days. The story grew a villain. It needed one. And Camilla was elected by a certain portion of the internet that had already decided who she was and was simply waiting for confirmation. The guard became a hero in the mythological sense, broad and flat and framed in golden light. Charlotte became a symbol of something, innocence or vulnerability or the tragedy of royal childhood, depending on which outlet was telling it. None of it was false exactly. That's the thing that makes this difficult to explain. The bones were there. Camilla had said the words. The guard had moved. Charlotte had stayed. But the bones assembled in that telling became something with a different skeleton than the creature I'd actually watched. I went back the next morning. I don't know why exactly. Partly habit. I'm a walker, I process things on foot, and my cousin's flat is close enough that it costs me nothing but time. Partly something I'm not ready to put a name to. He was there again. Different post. Or the same post, I'm not sure. The geometry of that entrance arranges itself similarly each day. The gates, the stone, the pale winter sky that looked like it had been painted by someone who'd only been told about blue, never shown it. I didn't approach. You don't approach. That's also the weather you dress for. I stood at the tourist distance and looked at him for a while. He was doing his job, which is to say he was doing nothing, magnificently. I thought about Charlotte's face when he blinked. I thought about the step. The one lateral step that rerouted everything. How small an action can be and still change the geometry of a moment. How you don't need to be dramatic to matter. How the most significant interventions are often the ones that look, from a distance, like nothing happened at all. He would not remember me. Why would he? I was one face in 100 faces that had drifted past that morning. I was weather. I was the city. But I had stood 12 meters from a young man who had heard 7 words on a cold November morning and had made, in the space of a held breath, a calculation that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with something older than protocol. He hadn't refused an order. He hadn't confronted anyone. He hadn't made a speech. He'd just put himself in a position where the order was slightly harder to execute than it had been 30 seconds before. He'd bought a 10-year-old 43 seconds of cold air and her own thoughts and whatever small stone or leaf she'd found on the pavement. And when she'd stood beside him, this child who'd been told in the gentlest possible terms that she was being redirected, who'd registered it, and decided to push back in the only way available to her, by simply staying. He had let her be the person who made that choice. That's all. That was the whole of it. The chestnut cart was back. The smell of it reached me on the wind, caramel smoke, the same as yesterday, and the day before that, and probably every November morning for the last decade. Some things are more permanent than the events that happen around them. I bought a bag. They came in a folded paper cone, hot enough to shift from hand to hand. I ate them on the walk back, past the school children who were there again. A different school this time. Same yellow vests. Same clipboard-holding teacher counting heads with the focused desperation of someone who knows the number is always slightly wrong. I thought. Charlotte put something in her pocket. Some small treasure from the pavement. She carried it away with her, through the door, into whatever afternoon was waiting. I thought, I hope she still has it. I thought, probably not. These things get lost. Pockets get emptied. Small stones become unremarkable again once they leave the context of the morning you found them. But, for one November afternoon, a 10-year-old girl stood on wet stone next to a young man who was technically furniture, and both of them watched a city go about its city business, and neither of them needed that moment to mean anything for it to mean everything. And somewhere in the ledger of small dignities, the unofficial record, the one that doesn't get filed anywhere, somebody wrote it down. I'm not sure why I needed to tell this. Only that it seemed important not to let the real version disappear entirely under the version that travels faster. Whatever he was doing in that moment, that guard, that step, that blink, it was not nothing. It was exactly the right size for what it was. And that, I think, is harder than it looks.